I would like that to be the opinion that we could take. However, we have to look at this objectively, and there is just a simple fact of the matter. Now, most likely, you all have heard of the issue of trans women competing against cis women in sports. This has been a very common complaint levied by people on the right for quite some time, and recently the national discussion has reached a boiling point because a Penn State swimmer, Lia Thomas, has become the first trans woman to win the NCAA swimming championship. Of course, because she won, everybody is now LARPing about how scary trans women are and how much they care about the women. Let's talk about this because this is a very complicated issue, and unfortunately I know a lot of people would probably prefer me to just say, get over it, transphobes, there's absolutely nothing to worry about, okay, if you've been on hormones, fuck off, suck it up, deal with it. But this conversation is a lot more nuanced than that. So first, I'm going to begin with a brief virtue signal, okay? Which is, regardless of what the science has to say about trans women competing against cis women, this does not take away from the validity of trans women in their identity. Trans women can be women while also recognizing that there are biological differences between trans women and cis women. This is just a fact of the matter. Of course, this is part of the reason why a lot of trans people struggle with gender dysphoria. It is the awareness that their biology is different from their gender identity. I just want to clear up a couple myths about Lia Thomas. So you'll hear things like, she dominated, she's wrecking everybody, and you'll see that meme going around that shows how before she transitioned, allegedly she was ranking like 400th, and then after transitioning she was dominating number 1. That's not true. That ranking was taken from when she was in the middle of transitioning, when her muscle mass was deteriorating. So she was very good on the men's team. She's also very good now on the women's team as well. Furthermore, this is a complete argument breaker for anyone trying to complain that Lia Thomas is dominating all sports or whatever. She finished last place in the 100-yard freestyle final at NCAA championships. She finished last place against cis women in this specific event. So she may have won the 500 meter, or the 500 yard, excuse me, but she lost repeatedly against cis women. So I wholeheartedly reject this dumb fuck notion that Lia Thomas was really bad against the men and then jumped in and transitioned so that she could compete against the women and now is dominating. This is just not true. She became the first transgender athlete to win a Division I national title with a victory in the 500 free, but she lost repeatedly against cis women in other events. She's clearly not like this massive muscle Aquaman, okay? Like, fuck off with that bullshit. I'm not taking a Fox News article seriously. Holy shit, guys. Fox Sports is reporting on the sports event. This absolutely supports my argument that she was not dominating every sport. Second of all, her win against the cis women in the 500 free was by less than 2 seconds. Second of all, I want to go over some of the insanity, particularly from the right. Of course, the right is the ones that tend to LARP about this the most. They're usually not in favor of women very much. When it comes to caring about women's sports in high school and college, something that none of them gave a fucking crap about beforehand, suddenly they get very hot and heavy about this issue because it gives them an opportunity to shit on trans people. As is demonstrated here, Fox News has aired 126 segments on trans student athletes. They could only find 9 nationwide. This is why the narrative is completely screwed when people are like, you know, trans women, they're dominating the women's sports. Cis women never have a chance anymore. The delicate flowers that are known as cis women, they're too weak. They can't compete with the power of the transes. This is not true, of course. As demonstrated by the fact Fox News, 126 segments only 9 examples. Bruh. Talk about manufactured fear, okay? That is what's happening right here, my friends. They've spent the past year warning viewers about the non-existent dangers of transgender student athletes. The channel has spent more time on this topic in just the first months of this year than it did in the past 2 years combined. With 126 segments on the topic since 2019, the channel was only able to reference 9 athletes from around the nation, and more than a third of those segments were about 2 former high school students who haven't competed in years. None of the athletes dominated their sports. So it's quite possible that conservatives just have a domination fetish, and no matter what, they always just want to be dominated in one way or another. That's quite possible. However, let's move off of this, please, conservatives. Can we stop with the whole trans women are ruining women's sports, women will never be able to compete again, ooh woo? Like, just fuck off with that, okay? That's bullshit. Let's talk about what the research has to say about this issue, okay? I know that it would be very preferred if my position was, after going on hormones, trans women are identical to cis women, they can compete fairly against cis women in all sports, and you transphobes need to just shut the fuck up. I would like that to be the opinion that we could take. However, we have to look at this objectively, and there is just a simple fact of the matter that trans women do retain some of their strength and muscle mass even after taking hormone treatment. The question isn't so much, should we allow trans women to compete against cis women in all sports? We need to take a more nuanced approach, which is it's on a sports by sports basis. So there are some sports, like boxing, for example, that probably wouldn't be as acceptable to include trans women against cis women. But then there are other sports, like swimming, where it actually makes plenty of sense to include trans women competing against cis women. It is undeniable that transgender women do outpace cisgender women in athletic tests after 1 year on hormones. This is just a fact of the matter now. So transgender women retain an advantage in upper body strength, they can do push-ups and sit-ups, over female controls for 1 to 2 years after starting gender-affirming hormones. So keep in mind also, though, that upper body strength, that's not everything. That doesn't determine your win in every sport by any means. So for example, trans women might have an advantage with more upper body strength, but they also might have a disadvantage in the sense that now they are taking hormones which make them generally weaker, but they also tend to be taller. So there's less muscle to compensate for a taller, larger height. That can be a disadvantage for the trans woman competing against cis women. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty nuance there, and I want to be just crystal clear that upper body strength doesn't determine that you're going to dominate every sport. However, it's undeniable that transgender women retain an advantage in endurance over female controls for over 2 years after starting gender-affirming hormones. Athletic performance among transgender men matches or exceeds athletic performance for male controls after 1 year on testosterone. Athletic advantage after 1 year. The study included 29 transgender men and 46 transgender women. Compared with cisgender women, transgender women performed more push-ups and more sit-ups prior to hormones. The transgender group continued to outperform the cisgender cohort until 2 years on treatment. For the 1.5-mile run, transgender women were faster than the cisgender women before treatment. Times in the run worsened for transgender women after starting hormones, but the group remained faster than the cisgender cohort 2 years after treatment began. Currently, the standards make it so that trans women must be on testosterone suppression, taking hormones and whatnot, for a minimum of 1 year before they can compete against cis women. But I think that studies like this call into question those guidelines. Those guidelines might have to be beefed up. They might have to. It might have to be that actually you need to be on hormones for 3 years before you can fairly compete. Yeah, one really important factor, though, is hemoglobin levels. And this is a really important, possibly the most important physiological factor when it comes to endurance-related sports. And hemoglobin is what transports oxygen through the body and into the muscles, which is why cis men tend to have an advantage over cis women because they're able to intake more oxygen to their muscles. It's just a simple fact. However, this is another really crucial distinction. Since hemoglobin levels follow testosterone levels, non-transgender men tend to have higher hemoglobin levels than cisgender women, but a study found that testosterone suppressants reduced hemoglobin levels in trans women to that of cisgender women, thus eliminating that specific advantage. There is absolutely an advantage that biological males have over biological females, but once they undergo hormone treatment, it does reduce that to around the same level of cis women. So right there, based on that study, you now have the question, okay, well, maybe in endurance-related sports, it is fair for trans women to compete. And this is exactly why we have to take this on a sports-by-sports basis. It is not just a broad, sweeping brush where we just say, let trans women compete against cis women, let trans men compete against cis men. It has to be based on the specific sport. So first of all, 95% of cisgender women have testosterone below 2 nanomoles per liter. And in a recent study of nearly 250 trans women, 94% of them had testosterone below 2 nanomoles per liter. So once they are taking hormones, the trans woman does tend to fall in line much closer to that of their cisgender competitors. They do. So again, just if they retain some of their strength, which is a question that needs to be taken into consideration and whatnot, it does not mean that they are like these muscle monsters just wrecking the women left and right. Once they go through hormone treatment, they absolutely do become much more comparable to their cisgender counterparts. So this article right here is with a doctor, and there are all kinds of questions that were asked here, and I just thought that this really cleared a lot of this up. Lean body mass and strength are less affected than hemoglobin, but we don't really have studies on trans athletes. Our review and another look at studies on non-athletes. One of the important things to note is that even before starting hormone therapy, the trans women in these studies were substantially less strong than cis men. I put it colloquially that as a population group, trans women would rather starve themselves to look like models than put on muscle to be athletes. So there might be some correlation there also, that if you identify as a woman, you're obviously trying to present as a woman, and that follows that you would rather not gain a lot of muscle mass. She goes on to say, there's absolutely no question in my mind that trans women will maintain strength advantages over cis women even after hormone therapy. That's based on my clinical experience rather than published data, but I would say there's zero doubt in my mind. The question asked next was, your review found that lean body mass and muscle strength decline but remain above cis female levels up to 3 years after hormone transition. And she says, it's probably true that the greatest changes in the strength of trans women on hormone therapy occur in the first 12 months, but there aren't enough data to make a definitive statement. It is possible that there are further declines in strength after 36 months, and a recent small study out of Brazil suggests that the entire strength advantage might go away. But they just looked at grip strength in 8 trans women compared with 8 cis women matched for BMI. So I think the matter is far from settled. Now, this is something else that bolsters Lia Thomas competing against women when it comes to swimming. A recent paper quantified the male advantage across various sports using data from cis men and women. Track and swimming were at the lower end with about a 12% differential. So I think it's fair to say that Lia Thomas, being on hormones for over 2 years, coming in last in multiple competitions, and only beating her cisgender counterparts by very, very narrow margins, I think it's fair to say that Lia Thomas is pretty comparable to her cisgender competitors. I think that it's pretty fair for Lia Thomas to be competing against cis people or cis women when it comes to swimming. I do. Since I said we have to go on a sports-by-sports basis, when it comes to swimming, that's fair, in my opinion. Weightlifting, however, was on the high end. So that's another thing, is that maybe when we're talking about weightlifting, there might be some advantages there that need to be taken into consideration. There's also another thing to keep in mind, is that every individual human being is different. Every individual human has some advantages over other individual humans. For example, there are some cis women that have way higher levels of testosterone. For example, when we're talking about the sport baseball, the way that the diamond of the field works makes it so that left-handed pitchers have a better advantage there. But we don't really throw a big fit about the left-handed people dominating the right-handed people in baseball. There are just some advantages and there are some disadvantages in any sport. There's never going to be this complete 100% equal playing field in the sport, and that's why I think it's more important to look at not is it a fair competition, but rather is it a meaningful competition. Harper goes on to say that I suspect that trans girls would still on average be taller. I don't know that for certain. There may be very minimal advantages. When the IOC first put rules in place in 2004, they said these rules only apply to trans women who experience male puberty. So that's another thing to keep in mind also, is that a trans woman would actually be virtually identical to a cis woman when we're talking about advantages or disadvantages if, say, they recognized that they were trans at like the age of 9, went on puberty blockers, and then went on to transition later in life. It's the going through male puberty that gives you that upper hand. It gives you the additional strength. It gives you the additional height. Boxing does bring up contact and collision, and World Rugby recently came out against trans women's participation, citing safety issues. So again, sports by sports basis, this might not be the best environment for a trans woman to be competing against cis women, because there might be some advantages there, since they tend to, on average, be taller. Are there any potential disadvantages for trans women athletes? Trans women have larger frames, which are now being powered by reduced muscle mass and reduced aerobic capacity. And that can lead to disadvantages in things like quickness, recovery endurance, and things that might not be quite as obvious as seeing somebody bigger. How do these disadvantages play out? We don't know yet because the research is very early on, but the idea that trans women only have advantages just isn't true. The analogy I've used is that it's like a big car with a small engine competing against a small car with a small engine. It's a really touchy issue. It's not as cut and dry as I think anybody would prefer it to be. I would prefer it to be that if you go on hormone treatment for 1 year, trans women are virtually identical to cis women when it comes to the advantages in sports. But that's just not true. And I think that by being realistic about this, we can absolutely make sports more accommodating for trans people. I think by being aware of the realistic and even inconvenient truths of this matter, we can actually use that to be more accommodating for trans people in these individual sports. This is just bigotry, dude. Holy shit. Oh my God. No, it is not bigotry to acknowledge the realities that trans women retain some strength over cis women. Holy shit. I feel like that article was biased. You people you sound like conservatives where data contradicts your narrative, and so you freak out and try to say the source doesn't matter or you're just being a bigot. The only thing dropping faster than the user count in here is his IQ. Would any of you people be willing to debate me on this subject? I'm actually like pissed off at you, chat. Shut the fuck up right now. Okay? Seriously, we're gonna get Discord or banned. Yeah. This is ridiculous. And by the way, being super snowflakey about these issues makes it harder to have these conversations. And again, it makes it harder to figure out where we take the issue and how to be more accommodating to trans people. Because then if anybody dares read what the studies say, they're labeled a fucking bigot. I am not a bigot. I'm entirely accommodating of trans people. I think that trans people are valid. I think that trans women are women. I think that trans men are men. Okay? I can virtue signal about this all day long, but again, we are going to take a serious approach when it comes to the research on this subject. What a horrible argument. You people are literally obsessed with the aesthetics, and if I aesthetically don't sound like how you think a liberal should sound, then you get mad and triggered. That's it. All sports are exclusionary, okay? Now, we can talk about, are there better ways to categorize sports? Are there better ways to categorize competitors? Maybe we should categorize people solely based on their testosterone levels. I guess we could do that. Can you talk about Michael Phelps? Yeah, that's another great example. Michael Phelps was literally born. He was just genetically set up so that his arms were significantly longer than his height. That gives him an advantage in swimming. There are always going to be some advantages and some disadvantages. And again, I'm not saying that trans women retaining some muscle mass after 1 year on hormones means that they are going to then dominate women, or cis women, in every competition. That's not the case. Hunter, I'm willing to argue with a dumbass, so I'll be on Discord. Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and send you the invite and we'll talk. And you can tell me how the fuck this is bigoted.
Hello?
Hello, how are you today?
Doing great, thanks. And you?
Well, I'm not doing too good because you were saying a lot of kind of dumb stuff in my chat. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you get notified when I drop a new video.